Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's session. My name is Jennifer Martin, and I am the Semarchy Channel Sales Director for North America. Today, our discussion will center on the increasing focus on improving provider data quality and a next-generation master data management solution to help your organization take control of that data. A few housekeeping items before we start. We will have a Q&A session at the end, so please type all of your questions in using the chat function. I'd like to introduce you to Deanna Nole and Paul Klassen from IMT. IMT has been a Semarchy implementation partner since early 2021. Deanna and Paul collectively have been working in health data management and the implementation of patient and provider registries for the past 15 years across public, private healthcare delivery, and payer environments. Together, they bring expertise in healthcare integration and analytics and are the champions of the health iDM solution they will present today. Now, I'll hand you over to Deanna, who will start today's session. Deanna?
Great. Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks for joining today. We have a pretty interesting topic, I think, today, especially relative to a lot of what we're hearing about from within the industry and customers around taking control of provider data. Let me quickly go through what we're going to cover today. We're aiming for about a 45-minute webinar today, and hopefully we will get through all of this stuff and get time for some interesting questions from you all. So first, I want to do an introduction about IMT and Semarchy in case you're not familiar with us. I'm going to focus a bit on some of the industry and regulatory drivers that are demanding higher quality and increased sharing of provider data. Then I'm going to dig into what some of the real world practical challenges are with managing provider data within a healthcare system or within a payer environment. And then I'm going to go through what the benefits and key functions of a provider data management solution should be to be able to address those challenges and also unlock additional opportunities in making better use of your provider data. And then lastly, we're going to do a demonstration of what we are calling Health iDM. This is an application or solution that we've configured at IMT that uses Semarchy technology at the foundation. And so we're going to show you a little bit about how that works and what some of the really cool things about the solution are. So first off, if you're not familiar with IMT, we are a services and software solutions company based in Chicago and in Winnipeg in Canada. And our focus has been on delivering solutions around 360 data views of data, mostly in the healthcare space, but we also have done it in other verticals as well, to deliver patient and provider registries, longitudinal care records that are used in private healthcare settings, as well as for public health and public services settings as well. We have been around for just over 30 years. We have very highly trained staff in master data management technologies within our organization. On average, the tenure of someone in our company has been around for about 10 years. So we have people with very deep skills in healthcare data management, integration, and analytics. And we partner with a number of organizations that have technologies, whether that be hosting technologies or master data management technologies. Today, we're talking about our solution partnership with Semarchy. And we also have a services arm that provides managed services of any solutions, especially with the uptake in cloud managed services, particularly as we're seeing more and more in the healthcare space. We also offer fully managed hosted and migration services as well. So we're talking about Semarchy technology today. And just to introduce Semarchy, they are a market leader in data integration and master data management technology. They have solutions that provide you a unified data platform that can be used to really address all of the issues that are part of a data pipeline and processing. And over the course of the presentation, I'm going to show you how those items are applied, particularly to the provider data domains. They have over 250 customers across multiple verticals around the world, and they're very highly recognized and acknowledged by industry analysts such as Gartner, as well as by their customers. They continue to receive the Customer Choice Peer Insights Awards, which means that the customers that they have give them very high rankings in terms of the capabilities of the technology, responsiveness of them as a vendor, and so forth. So if that report is available on the Semarchy site if you're ever interested in reading about that, but it's something that definitely influenced us when we were looking at broadening our portfolio a little bit and looking on taking on some other skills and putting a few more tools in our bag that we take to our customers. So I encourage you to go and look up that report if you have the time. It's very informative. So as I alluded to, so we are going to be talking about an application called Health iDM that is focused on healthcare data management. Today we're focusing specifically on provider data management, but it can support a number of different domains. We want to hone in on that problem for today. And what we did is we took the technology of the Semarchy Unified Data Platform that gives you a number of tools to support data discovery, integration, enrichment, master data management, reporting dashboards, and governance models. And we put our healthcare expertise, services, and configuration around that to deliver a solution that understands and comes with domain models that relate to provider data, whether that be individual practitioners or organizations' locations, as well as integration profiles, reference data management and sources, and enrichment that applies to being able to get the best view of provider data. So I'm gonna move away from the solution side for a second and go more into kind of what are the problems we're trying to solve. But just out of the gate, I wanted to establish that we're going to be talking about a solution that we have applied our technology and healthcare integration analytics expertise to be able to deliver this solution. So industry and regulatory drivers that I'm sure you're all aware of, and hopefully there's something on this list that resonates with the problems that you're looking at. But just thinking strategically, just within your organization, we all know that there are silos of provider data that exist in a number of different systems for many different purposes, whether that be in EHR or for billing or revenue cycle management or for CRM. But overall, there's a single view of that provider and all the contexts and considerations that it has across all the systems and departments. That's likely due to all these applications have different system owners or different departments or stakeholders that are responsible for that data. And to date, there hasn't really been a very clear place on where to put that data. But provider data is very important as it relates to determining provider attribution, and cost and quality measurements based on patient encounters and things like that. Oftentimes there's data that's coming in from outside your four walls, whether that's coming from a payer, from an HIE, or from some other external service that perhaps you're working with to provide an outreach service, something like that, where you'd be receiving lists of provider data, and you need that to link in with what you know that provider data to be able to do those accurate measurements. And we've seen in many cases, some customers have had challenges with that, just trying to match against, say, what they might have in their Epic system, for example. And the other thing that is very important to provider satisfaction and to patient satisfaction is to make sure that people can find the provider they're looking for with the services they require in a location that's convenient, that takes their insurance, right? Clear as that. And we've heard of many challenges being able to provide the best view for, say, internal provider referrals versus patients finding a provider. And how do you create that right profile and select what are the attributes that should be in the view that's accessible to the outside world? So you need to have a little bit of flexibility as well as governance around that when you're considering, what are you going to put out there and make accessible to other entities. And then from a regulatory perspective, there is a No Surprises Act, which probably applies a little bit more to the payer side than to the individual provider, but there's a little bit of a shared burden there in terms of pushing forward some requirements and standards for how often provider data is updated, how often provider data is verified, with a more frequent gate, and then also to make sure that network status for services is always up to date to make sure there's no surprise referral or billing events, because there can be implications to that. The CMS rules for information blocking require FHIR accessible provider directories for health plans. This has been going on for a little bit now, but during the time of COVID, their cross-state telehealth licensing, there were a number of waivers put in place to be able to provide access to care more quickly. Those are expiring or have expired in some cases. And so it's really important to be able to track that closely and make sure you have the most up-to-date information regarding licensing, especially if you're an organization that covers many different states. And then lastly, when you're looking at any sort of transaction that's coming in, or whether that's billing related or something like that, it's really important to be able to do the privilege and credential verification for a claims reimbursement to make sure that that provider is actually credentialed to provide that service, and also for fraud detection as well, just to make sure that as transactions are coming in for certain providers, does all of the information on the provider transaction match well enough to make sure that that can continue down the process within your organization. So then just more tactically with the real world challenges of provider data, I just say provider if it's one thing. Well, providers are individuals, they're organizations, and also you look at them from different, they have different spheres, right? Some of them are employed by your system, some of them are independent, some are affiliated, and some of them may take on different roles based on the type of interaction they're having with you. That's something that can be very important to have to maintain the notion of those spheres or that classification while using the data within your organization. Also pretty important to analytics as well. And then we all know that there's many different sources of provider data, not only internally but externally. And sometimes you'll have two different representations of a provider record, and one is not incorrect. They are just different because they're being used in a particular context where there are things that are different about them, based on how that provider is actually working in the system, for that particular case. So we'll talk about some examples of that, but it's very important that you can't have just like a single representation of a provider record. It has to be contextual and has to be, probably quite broad so that you can make sure that you don't eliminate or drop any information that really is important to some stakeholders, even if it's not important to all. And so because of the complexity of provider data profiles, what we've seen is a lot of organizations are just dealing with the provider data in a way that is very labor intensive. And some of that is due to a lack of transparency. So, if you think about, patient data integration, integration has really come a long way. We accept feeds of patient data from a lot of different systems and places. You trust where that data comes from. There's pretty good standards applied in terms of, what's required and what needs to be followed to have a complete transaction about a patient encounter or event. Provider, not so much. Still mostly batch, some standards available, but still kind of slowly emerging. So for that reason, there's not a lot of automation going on when it comes to how provider data is maintained. A number of organizations we've spoken to are just resorting to manually entering data about providers into the systems individually because they don't have a really good automated way to validate or track against all the different system-specific validations that could occur in requirements. So for that reason, they need to look at each one and pull in data from different places manually to make it fit. That can be error-prone and also take a long time. And so by not processing these automated updates, due to these concerns about missing data or possibly introducing data collisions. As I said before, if you have two representations of a provider that are both kind of right, but there's going to be variations based on the context that that data is used. You may be fearful for letting just one come in and augment or update another. So you need a little more control around the governance and review and the business rules around when certain data elements are applied. We've heard a number of tales, more from the provider side about, just some frustration saying, I've given my updated information about my fax number, right, or about my, current specializations, office hours, things like that to this department. Why doesn't this other department have it? Why is it still wrong on the website? Why am I having to give this information many times? And so for that reason, and oftentimes because there is no centralized management of that, right? There's no way to contribute that one update and then make sure everyone else has it. So that's something that really kind of makes giving consideration to some centralized management and sharing of that important. And then also, as I mentioned, when it comes to bringing in external provider data from, let's say, population health roster or an outreach organization or something like that, if you don't get the exact right representation of the provider's identifier, first name, last name, and primary practice location, it's very likely that provider isn't going to match up with the other representations you have, and that's going to result in double counting or having duplicate representations in your analytics, which is going to hurt your metrics. So thinking about having a centralized provider management solution will bridge that gap. When I say centralized, what I mean by is centralized with distributed control. We're going to talk about what that means as we go forward. But you want to have in a single place, though, that complete view of provider data that gives all of the information about the provider's locations, specializations, credentials, network status, and affiliations, so that that can be used across all of the other processes. As you want to be able to use also this data not only to contribute to analytics, but also as a transactional piece. So as new transactions that are coming in about providers, whether that be a claim or something like that, you want to be able to quickly match against who that provider is to say, yes, we know who this is. This is appropriate versus no, this doesn't quite match up. Let's put this aside for review and have someone remediate this. And so, by having that trusted data and a single view of that provider data, and also establishing a single identifier for your providers, that can really help with the accuracy and the efficiency of the analytics that are coming from your data warehouse, how you're accessing and presenting provider data in your portals, or how you're creating extract lists to send to outside organizations, whether that be, HIEs or with the payers. And then lastly, integration is becoming more and more important as it relates to provider data. As I said before, there were kind of some standards in HL7 for it, like the MFN, but not widely adopted, at least that I'm aware. We are seeing now the FHIR standards emerge for provider directory lookup and expected use of that and ability to expose that to other organizations who need to understand everything about a provider from the health network. So having quick and efficient and accurate integration methods is very important as well. So with the Health iDM solution that's built on Semarchy, which is really a next generation master data management solution, it brings to the table for data management what I'd call traditional functions for matching, linking, establishing hierarchy and relationships for providers and organizations, steward and governance. Those are things I think we're all pretty familiar with. Particularly if you've done work in other like registry or patient data management functions. But it also brings within the same platform the ability to apply data profiling, data quality enrichment, the ability to create dashboards and give that to business users to create self-service analytics, reference data management functionality, and also some pretty great workflow functionality that allows for the ability to distribute data to the right folks within the organization who need to interact with, approve, augment, potentially even author provider data. And also that's driven by the ability to quickly create applications that are specific for each stakeholder's function. And we're going to show you an example of the application in just a bit. It has a unique and agile architecture. It has a flexible hybrid architecture. If you're familiar with the Gartner implementation styles for master data management, there's the registry style through consolidation, coexistence, and centralized. You can support all of those different styles in this platform and mix and match them. So if you want to have some elements in the domain that are clearly just referential and focus on linking back to other places, you can do that. But then you can also open up a place where data is actually owned by the hub and every place in between. And I said the integration function is very flexible. Anything that you model within the solution, it auto-generates the REST API layer. So you don't have to go and say, do your model and then design your integration. It automatically designs and exposes that for you. We're going to show you that in a bit as well. And then lastly, I think that with having so many functions in a single package, and the way that the solution is packaged and offered by Semarchy, it does really optimize your total cost of ownership for data management. There's an unlimited number of object types. It's a single product to install and operate. It supports cloud native technologies and databases, which can help drive down the cost of data storage. And also, it just opens up access to your data in a way that you can, expose information through these other applications to different departments throughout your organization by doing things with configuration and not coding. So I'm going to get into the demo here in just a second, but we talked about all the different provider data sources and data consumers, and you know which ones are yours. But with the functions within the tool, we were able to support the full data pipeline that's required for provider data management. So just as some examples here, with the discovery process, you're able to, through profiling functionality, onboard and understand your existing data sources. With the data profiling function, understand where your data quality issues might lie, define the right enrichments and variations you need to apply those to your source data feeds. You can load data into the system using real-time or batch feeds to be able to create new or contribute updated data to the record, eliminating kind of more of those manual processes that I talked about before, and then also enable outbound access through the REST API layer. Enrichment and enforcement and automation is really key here, and that to be able to pull in additional data, to be able to augment data from third-party sources, reference data, or to be able to distribute it to the right department to augment that data is very important. Presenting data updates to the people who need it based on business rules, and also giving them transparency to what those rules are is critical for adoption, and also to make sure that your governance program actually executes as designed. You can do reporting on the quality and composition of that data, on the relationships that you establish, and also let folks design and build their own dashboards as necessary. And then you can just use the tools to maintain your ongoing data compliance policies, see where is their compliance, where are there things that are violating rules that you've established that you want to be able to make sure, maybe you're looking to improve a data source and you're measuring that against how often is this data rule violated and all that. So really allows you to design your own program with the rules that you have within a single foundation. So let me go ahead and jump into the demo here, and then we'll switch over to this. Okay. So here I'm logging into an application that we put together. I said Health iDM for Provider. We also have a solution that incorporates patient data as well. This one's focusing on the provider use case, as we talked about here. And we assembled this by using all the components to create the right type of stewardship, data model, hierarchies, and also data tasks that you might want to consider for provider data. This is all configurable and extensible. These are just some examples that we pulled from real world use cases that we had seen. Okay, so really all I've done here is I've gone through a search to say, let me go ahead and review any providers that have family medicine, right, as a part of their specialization and their name. You can do an open search and look at all the types of domains that you have, whether they be organizations or they are individual providers. You can also, create a search where you can just search for a name, or you can put up specific forms where you can allow someone to look for any data attribute that's available within the model. So I'm going to go ahead and do a lookup for an individual provider so I can show you the type of data that we're modeling here. So this is a view of the data that's been assembled into what's called the golden view, and that's comprised from master records that have come from a lot of different places. An algorithm has been applied and they've been linked together. So pretty standard master data management process. But what this allows us to do is to create a really good view on the data that's been brought together and show you what's happened to it along the way. So we have, the demographics and contact information for addresses. Obviously, you have many addresses for a provider, but all of those addresses you can go ahead and take and send it through an enrichment process, whether that's using Melissa data or Google Maps or USPS, and you can see what the differences are in that data. And you also can, separate out and divide out and decide who has access to seeing what information about this provider. Down here, I have some attributes like the say marketing, and this is the kind of stuff that generally isn't maybe maintained anywhere in a source system, particularly a clinical system or a billing system, but it really is important to some of the CRM functions and to provider relations. So the point is that when you have a hybrid architecture hub, you can add some data elements into the centralized hub that can be maintained and owned here and shared with other teams if it's not available in a source system. And so, for example, and I can see, well, where is this field actually used? And I can say, well, this is a Boolean value that's used for filtering results on the Find a Doc website. And you could say this is manually maintained. You could say who the people are who maintain it. And this is part of the data dictionary functionality that allows you to give additional information about how each field is used to make sure that anyone who's using the information or contributing data is using it properly. So, bringing in licenses and accreditations from any number of places is important. I want to show you something here. So for a specialization, there's taxonomy codes, which I've yet to memorize what taxonomy codes stand for. But if you look at these, you can see there's a lot more information behind it. Well, this is an example of reference data, where when I receive information about this provider's specializations, I get a set of codes, but I don't necessarily have all these descriptions. And it'd be really useful to have these descriptions if I want other people to be able to understand, what this actually means. So we pull this data in from a reference data list from NUCC, which I'll show you the list in a second. So you can bring that in. You don't have to maintain all the sub-level detail. You can just bring in additional data to describe what that is. Any number of identifiers here. I'm going to switch to privileges as well. So we talk about relationships and modeling both individual providers and organizations in the centralized hub. These are reflections of additional types of relationships where we have all of the organizations and their hierarchies loaded into the solution as well. And I can establish a relationship between these organizations and then give descriptions about what that provider's role is at that particular place. And this is something that could be fed from a feed or be manually updated or changed. Again, oftentimes important to the Find a Doc. So it gives you a place to have additional contextual representation of how providers work within the network. If you do have patient domains enabled, you can also establish, patient-provider relationships here, and also, plan network affiliations, all of that. So now within the master records, this record came together with contributions from 4 different sources here, all with different levels of data, and they were matched together, based on an algorithm that determined whether or not it was, they were close enough to match, and that's what created that golden composite view. But all the individual master records are still maintained. So you always have that lineage of data. Let me go over to the organization side as well. So these are all in the same hub, but you can load in and establish hierarchies as well. So you have the list of organizational hierarchies and the sub organizations that make them up here, or you can also include in your hierarchy the providers that are part of that organization. You could say within Broadview Radiology Partners, these are the providers that are part of it. So lots of ways to represent and use this data, and also make sure you're always using a single representation of that organization. You're not typing it in fresh every time. When you go ahead and create these relationships, you are always able to search against a predefined list. You can also give a list of all of your provider data to the organization to say, let me go ahead and navigate this. Let me create a list that I want to use. And so you can create filters that are saved so that you can hold on to that information and say, well, I'm someone who works in radiology, just filter down to the radiology providers. So just really opening up access to this data, and then you go in there, you see the full level of data that I just showed you. Now let's talk about data management a little bit. So as I said, data comes together, they try to match. Sometimes the information isn't close enough to match. So an out-of-the-box function here is to do the duplicate management, identify records that perhaps should be merged, and tasks are created for you to review those duplicate suggestions. And you can see, what the data is that came in that attempted to match, and see where the differences are, and then make a decision on going ahead and matching those or not. And so, this will be defined by the information that's set in the algorithm. I talked about transparency earlier. This just let me see right now what are the scores and the rules around matching for providers, and what makes it match and contributes to the score. So this is an example of giving a little more transparency to things. I want to show you now a custom workflow that we created, or workflow that anyone could create. So as I said, there's data elements sometimes that just don't come in with data feeds, and they require some contribution from particular departments. So what we did is we created a workflow that just says, update provider care profile. And this means that we know in this profile, we don't have information about those marketing flags I showed you before. So someone needs to complete those, or say, yes or no to those values, and then complete them so that can be included as part of the profile. We also have a collection profile for adding network information and plan information. So again, it's always optimal for this data to be fed in some way, but if you have to update it manually, you want to make sure that you're just honing in on the records that need data to be added, and you can direct that to the right team or person who's supposed to do that. And you can also, if you want to, I'm just do a real quick check here where I'm going to go ahead and add that value. I can finish that, and I can go ahead and send that to another user for them to review before it becomes part of the final record, or go ahead and submit it. And that feeds into the workflow and inbox functionality that you can use. So that's something that's really great, especially if you have multiple departments contributing to this. So let me now talk a little bit about data profiling. This is really important as you're looking at adding new sources into the provider data universe. So any set of data that you want to introduce into the hub, typically this is something that's done, as an earlier part of the process. If you're bringing in a new source, you can run it through the profile tool. And what that will do is it will let you know, what are the frequency of values of your data, what's the quality of it. So I'm just going to show you a really easy example to understand. Is we had some data that we brought in, we wanted to add, and we saw that the way that the degrees are represented are all over the place. So this isn't going to match up with our valid values and code lists and things like that. That could be okay, but you could decide to apply some standardization at the time of load. You could decide to put an enrichment or a validation in place that will go ahead and correct that data as it comes in as well. So by having the ability to look at any set of data that's in profile, you can make some proactive decisions about how you want to apply enrichments and validations to your data. And then the last place I'm going to touch on before I hand it over to Paul, where he looks a little bit more at the technical side of things, is you can create dashboards and reports based on any of the data in the hub. And there's a dashboard builder tool that's available and can be used by technical users, can be used by business users. It's a combination of creating some SQL-like queries and collecting and selecting from a collection of controls. But you can, look at what's the composition of the data in terms of what collected around provider gender, or where's my distribution of providers by specialization, for example. Or you can expose information that gives more look into the guts of how the matching is working. Where's your data coming from? Kind of more from the data stewardship and governance side of the house. So, that was, kind of a quick touch on the functions of what you can put together to create an application like this, or other applications that just expose bits and pieces of this to stakeholders within the organization. But now I'm going to flip it over to Paul, who's going to show you a little bit more about the configuration side, so you can see kind of what all the capabilities are in terms of how this is put together, and then we'll go to a Q&A.
So this is the welcome screen. We're going to start with the application builder. And this is the tool that we use to actually set up and configure the applications. So if you want to click on that, Deanna. And the nice thing about this, and click on the basic healthcare demo too, yeah. The nice thing about this is that the tool that they provide, this is all one component. So this is like the same URLs based on your role, based on your permissions, you get different access. And the tool that Semarchy's built here has some components that are very technical, but a lot of it can be done without necessarily high technical ability. So there's collaboration where you need a little bit of technical information, but there's lots of stuff that can be done just with a business level. So if you click the diagrams, this is the data model that we've created for this particular demo and like this provider health iDM platform. One of the things we would do with anyone who would use this is we'd work with them to customize this and make sure it fits their specific requirements. And so actually, I'm going to take an opportunity to answer a couple of questions right now in that the marketing attributes are values we created as part of this demo. If you had other marketing data or other structures of data or flags or permissions or privileges to capture, they can be added into this model. So there's no limit on the data model. You can create other objects. If you want to create, in this case, we have marketing attributes, but you could push this out into its own object. And then taxonomy, the same idea. So we've imported the NUC codes to do a taxonomy translation as reference data. You can import any kind of reference data. So if you wanted to have clinical terms with specialty, that is absolutely something that could be loaded in and then used as a reference in your workflows or models. So if we go to entities, just double click entities, Deanna. And then you double click, let's go down to provider near the bottom. No, in the main screen, stay in the main screen. There you go. And perfect. You'll see that there's a whole list of things here. We're going to talk a bit about a few things. So if we go to enrichers, this is important. Click in the main screen. So in the middle screen, click on enrichers. There we go. Yeah. This is where you can add transformative methods that will update your data and make it more complete. And this can be internal. You can have internal logic that you can just build using a SQL-like language. You can also call out to external enhancement services. This could also be a place where you could do reference mapping, such as taxonomy, or in this case, we have the example of the Google Maps being used to enhance the address and doing some enrichment to validate the marketing is populated correctly. Semarchy integrates with Google Maps, Melissa data, and it can really anything that has a REST API or can have data loaded in, you can put into an enricher. And the same thing with validation. So enrichers about improving data, and validations are about checking data to make sure they're correct. So you can hear you can validate if a address from a specific source, this is an example, matches the main address for your attribute, and flag it if it doesn't, to say, hey, someone provider came in through a CRM portal and entered an address. That address doesn't match what we have from the other sources. This is maybe a review, maybe some data needs to be updated. That can trigger actions, that can trigger workflows, which Deanna's already walked you through. So we can go back to the welcome screen.
I'm sorry, Paul, where's the welcome screen?
Go on the SemAdmin all the way to the right, click down, and all the way to the very far right. Yeah, there.
Oh, sorry.
The other thing, I don't want to take up too much time. So if you can you middle click the configuration icon, Deanna? Yeah, open a new tab, that's right. Never mind. Here is the tool set that lets you connect all the stuff to your other systems, or that's databases. So, the dashboarding, that analytics that Deanna showed, that can be extended to go against other data sources as well, beyond just the base ones, so that can extend to staging tables or other things. And you have, identity management, same source, single sign-on stuff, custom libraries. You can skin this to look like your organization. So use your colors, use your logos, all that kind of stuff can be done here. And it becomes pretty powerful. And then the last thing that we'll look at, and we talked about the REST API. So if you go on, that's auto-generated. So if I go to the REST API and we do the drop down on the right there, no.
Oops.
If you do that drop down, getting started, you'll see there's a bunch of different options there, both basic and advanced. So we'll just go basic for now. Health demo. Yep. this will generate a bunch of simple REST queries. And when you click on one of them, let's say provider, for instance, that's what we're looking at today. So you can see there is individual APIs per object you create, but you can also nest them into one. This will create simple examples, and you get examples of the JSON structure, the structure of the message that's being sent, you know, and then there's advanced. So if you want to go into the details of what you can do with REST API, there's an advanced. So you can use this as a very strong reference. If you copy this, it's going to work right away. So, and that's generated as you create your application. This is generated automatically, and all the documentation is created as well. So it's very, very powerful in terms of what you could do with it.
We had a question, Paul. Is there a download option for the JSON files?
In terms of like this documentation here,
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure. Jennifer, do you know offhand if you can download this documentation? I haven't done that.
I think, let me see. I think you might be able to attach. Hold on.
I've always used this just as a reference online, so I've never tried to do that.
We can definitely take that. We can take that as a follow-up, sure, and get that back to you, Samantha. You know what to do.
It does, you have to be careful with that, obviously, because this is generated from the application builder. So if you make a change, whatever you've downloaded isn't going to be accurate anymore. So there is some, you know, you want to make sure that if you're doing anything like that, even if you're capturing it and sending it to someone, you want to make sure that it's sort of time stamped or tracked, so that when changes are made, you can sort of manage those and track those.
Okay.
Any other questions from anyone? Something they'd like to see a bit more of? We went through this very quickly. Why don't you pull up, why don't you go back to the application builder, Deanna, while we see if anyone else has any questions. And pull up the workflows section. And we'll click on that. What you can see here is that this is not, someone can create a workflow and it uses the existing editor. So when you build this, you get default ones that are generated by the application, and then you can customize them or create new ones to say, how do you want the data to look on the screen? When you've done that and you have different ways of editing and controlling data with all those validations and enrichment we've talked about, you can stitch them together into a workflow here without any specific knowledge. It's just drag and drop. You assign different tasks to different roles. You can restrict, you can say, okay, this first provider relations update data task doesn't have the ability to submit. They have to escalate. And then a different role can submit or turn back. And you can have user assignment as you go down this path. So one task assigned to a group, the next task assigned to a specific person, or group or role. And this is all drag and drop. So you can make fairly complex processes in here using the existing editing without any specific technical knowledge, which can be very powerful.
Right. So I think one of the main kind of focuses here, which is maybe something that's a little different than what we generally put forth with our customers, is that when it comes to provider data management, it's acceptable and encouraged to actually apply validations, enrichers, and in many cases, make the data better, change the data, which is something that isn't often, promoted on the patient data side, right? Because there's clinical risk here. But here, if you're trying to get to the best provider representation, for a number of purposes that are maybe a little bit more business oriented, I think it's really a benefit to go ahead and make that data better and have everyone contribute to that, or maybe even start a process here as well. So.
Yeah. And you can do some cool stuff in here too, like apply validation. So if you can basically create a wizard for doing whatever task it is you're doing. So as you're entering data, as you're walking through the process, there's going to be validations and checks. You can have a screen where when you type in the address in one bar, it then auto completes it using one of those address enhancement services to the correct version that you can then upset. Like you'll see in you see this all the time in online shopping where you're typing your address in. It's like, did you mean this? This is a form that might work better for your shipping, right? Some of those things, especially if you're ever sending any kind of mailing out to your providers. or sending people to addresses to receive service, that can be very valuable. And you can also do validations to make sure that if there's certain requirements that when data is entered or when data is adjusted, that you're not missing an element, or you've done all the correct steps. Those validations can also be put into this flow to ensure that it's all done correctly.
So I think we're at the end of our target time, just a couple minutes over. So I think, hopefully we were able to kind of give enough of an overview so that you understand kind of where something like this would fit or have some value in your organization. Paul and I are available, obviously, to go into excruciatingly deep dives on all of the functions here as it relates to your use cases as well. So please feel free to reach out to either one of us if you want to continue any discussions. So thank you so much for your time today.